All right, so what we need to do now is want to create our users component. So let's just quickly jump into VS Code. Then under the components folder, just quickly go ahead and create a new folder called users. So inside this users folder, just quickly create a file called users.js. So in this file, this is where I'm actually going to go ahead and create my functional component. So just quickly go ahead and create the functional component called users, right? So I want to make this an arrow function. So let me remove this. Simply go ahead and say users, right? So here I will say const, right? Then I'll put an equal sign, right? So once I've made this an arrow function, so what we want to have is this users component is the one that is going to accept our list of users. So essentially, in other words, what we are saying is this user component is supposed to accept a user array that is going to have an array of users. So if I go ahead and go to my app.js, right? So this is where I'm going to call my users component. So let me just quickly go ahead and call my users component. So simply say users, right? Then the next thing that I need to do is I need to bring it in. So I will say import users from, right? So I need to import it from front end, then source, then components, then users, then the users component, right? So once I've brought it in, right, so what is going to happen is for all our API call, remember we have designed an API using Spring Boot. So we are going to have a get request to our API on Spring Boot, and then that get request is supposed to retrieve a list of users, right? So which means that list of users that is going to be retrieved is the one that we're going to pass here. So for example, we are going to create a users prop like this called users. Then we are simply going to pass the users, the list of users that would have received from our API. So let's just quickly go ahead and simulate this users object that we get from our API call. So in this case, I'll simply create a users. So this is going to be an array of users, right? So let me just quickly go ahead and put what I have here. So for example, if we in this app.js, this is where we're going to have our API calls, right? So we'll look at it shortly in the next section. But for now, this is if we call a get users from our API in Spring Boot, this is what we're going to receive. We're going to receive something like this. So in this array of users, we're going to have a user with an ID, the name, the surname, the email, right? And then another user. So depending on the number of users, they will be stored in an object called users, right? So this users is the one that we're going to pass as a prop, right, to our users component, right? So we have created a prop called users, and we are simply passing the users array into our component, right? So once you have done that, you're going to actually go ahead and save this, right? So inside this users, this is where I'm going to accept my users prop. So I'll use destructuring to actually go ahead and destructure my users prop. So with this users prop, this is I'm going to use it to iterate through my list of users so that I can display them here, right? So how I will do it is I use the map function. So I'll simply say users dot map, because remember I need to map through my list of users, right? So I'm going to pull a single user object, then I'll simply go ahead and map through that list of users. So in this case, for example, let's say I want to display the names. So I'll simply say create a p tag, make a new paragraph, then I'll say dot name, right? So what I'm doing here is I've put my prop code users, then I'm iterating or I'm mapping through my list of users, then I'm simply pulling the name of a specific user. So if I go ahead and save this, right, and I navigate to my Chrome, right, and then it's refreshed. So as you can see, if I refresh it again, as you can see, I now have my list of users with John and Mary, right? So this is what I need, right? So if I go ahead and go back here, so in this particular case, what I need to do is I need to further create another component called user info. So this user info is the one that is going to actually go ahead and display the detailing of that user. So instead of saying user.name or to pull the name, email, because we want to display the name, email, username of that specific user and surname. So instead of displaying it here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to yet create another another component called user info, right? So what I'm simply going to do is I'll create a user info component. So this user info component is the one that is going to display the details of that specific user. So I'll simply create a prop called user, then I'll pass the object that would have pulled, which is this user, right? So I've created a component called user info, then I've passed. So in this user info component, this is where I'm going to have the details of that specific user. All right, so what I will do next now is I want to actually go ahead. I seem to be having an error, so let's say I need to close this up. All right, so what I need to do now is I need to create this user info prop component, I mean. So to create this user info, I'll create a new folder inside components, then I'll call it user info, right? Then inside this user info directory, then I'll go ahead and create a user info .js file, right? So this is going to be a functional component, so I will say rfc, right? rfc, right? And I'll create my functional component. So I want to make this an arrow function, and I need to use this syntax, right? I will make it available for other components to use. Then I'll make it an arrow function. So making it an arrow function, this is just my personal preference. If you want to keep it as a function, the old JavaScript functional way, not the ES6 way, it's still okay. So this is just my function, my personal preference, right? So remember, in this user info, this component is going to receive a prop called user, because remember we have passed a user component. If you still remember, if you go back to users, right, we have created a prop called user. So, and we are passing the user object. So this one, we are receiving an object called user. So this is where we are going to put our details for our user info, right, for the information of that specific user. So what I need to do is I need to say, okay, so for this div tag, right, I'm simply going to have a style, right? Then this style, I'm simply going to call it info style, right? So what this style is going to do is going to perform some dynamic styling, right? For example, where we are saying for each and every specific user, we are simply going to go ahead and pull, we are simply going to have different colors for different users, right? So how I'm going to create it, for example, I can create the style, I can say const, right, info style, right, is equal to, then I'll do it like this. So the reason why I'm creating this style inside this function is because I want to have access to some of these user object properties. So like, for example, for my style, for my dynamic styling, what I'm going to do is, let me just go ahead and pull out the styles that I have here, right? So for these styles, I'm simply going to say I want to change the background color of a specific user, depending with the ID of the user, right? So what I'm simply doing is I'm saying background color is equal to, right, I'm simply going to say is equal to user, sorry, I'm simply going to say user dot ID. So I'm simply pulling the ID, right? So I'm saying if the user dot ID is an even number, so even %2 is equals to 0. So if the ID is an even number, can you go ahead and display some bluish color? Else, leave it as a white default color. Then for my styling, I'm simply putting a padding and the border bottom, display flex. I'll display it to the center. Then I'll justify the items to flex start so that they'll begin at the start of our flex. Then margin left 20 pixels, and then margin right, margin left, margin right of 20 pixels, right? So this is just simply my style for my div tag, right? So this is just styling. So the next thing that I need to do now is I need to have an icon, right? So I need to have some icons for my user, right? For example, like the account circle icon. So for those icons, I'm going to use the icons from Material Design. So the next thing that you probably need to do is to install the material icons, right? So to install the material icons, just open a new tab on your VS Code if you're using VS Code. And the first package that you need to install is the material UI icons, right? So if you say npm install material UI / core, you would have installed the material core icons package, right? So I'm not going to run this command because I already have installed. So once you have installed this one, then the next package that you need to install is the icons package from material UI, right? So I'm simply going to say npm install at material UI / icons. So this one will install the material icons package, right? Again, I'm not going to run it because I already have installed. So once you have installed those two packages, it's time for you to actually go ahead and bring them in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a div tag, right? I'm going to have a div tag. Why is this div? So I'm going to have a div tag, right? So inside this div tag, I'm going to have an icon and then the name of the user and the surname, right? So what I'm simply going to say is the icon that I need is called account circle icon, right? So what I will do is for that icon, I will simply say import, right? I'm going to import it. So I'm going to say import the icon that I need from is called account circle icon. Then I'm going to import it from material icons, then account, right? Account circle like this, right? So this is the first icon that I'm going to bring it in, right? So to use that icon is simply go ahead and say account. I'm simply going to say account circle icon like this, right? So this is the first icon that I need, right? So the second thing that I need to display, right, is I probably need to display the name of the user, right? So I'll use my p tag, then I'm going to pull it from my user, from my user object that my user prop here. So I'll simply say user dot name, right? Then I need the surname. So the next thing that I'll need to do is I'll need to put a tab. So I'll say nbsp, right, to put a tab. Then I'll have a paragraph tag, or you can put a span if you want. Then I'll say user dot surname like so. So what this does is this is going to display the account icon, the name and the surname of the user, right? Then we probably need to style this so that it will be displayed in a row, right? So I will say style is equals to let's say I can say account let's say style, right? So I need to style this, right? So I'll create an object called account style. Then inside this object, this is where I'm going to have my styles for my account. So the styles that I need to do is I simply need to display, right? Display. Then I'll say display flex, right? Then the next thing that I need is probably the justify content. Then I'll say space between. So I'll say justify content, then I'll say space between, right? So once I have these styles, my account info, I already have the styles going to be displayed to the center and stuff like that, right? So once I have my styles here, the next thing that I probably need to do is to actually display the rest. So right now I have the name, the surname, right? So after this div, I can actually go ahead and have the email, right? So I can say Next, I will display the user dot email. So instead of saying user.name, user.email, let me simply go ahead and further destructure my user object. So to destructure it, I'll simply go ahead and say const, then I'll simply go ahead and pull the ID, the name, the surname, the email, and the username from my object, right? So I'm simply pulling it from the prop object that we have here. So that in this case where we are saying user.id, we simply go ahead and say ID like this. So here we simply go ahead and say name, right? And simply go ahead and say surname. So that's the beauty of destructuring in JavaScript ES6. So here I want to display the email, so I'll simply go ahead and display the email. Then for the username, let me simply go ahead and copy this, right? And I say username, right? Username like so, right? So once I have the username like so, the next thing that I probably need is to go ahead and test this out. So to test this out, let's simply go ahead to Google Chrome, right? And let me refresh my page. It seems not to be working, so let's see if we have an error. Okay, let's go to the console. So it's saying user info is not all right. So I think we haven't brought in the user info component inside the users component. So let's go ahead to our VS Code and go to the users. Here we have the user info component, but we haven't brought it in. So let's bring it in here. So let's say import, right? So let's say import user info from, right? So let's simply import it from the user info directory, then the user info component itself. So once you have imported it, our web page is refreshed. So let's go ahead and navigate to the browser again and refresh our page. All right, so once you've done that, you can actually see that we now have our user component. So what I need to do here is I want to lastly add the two buttons here at the end of our username to the far right. So I want to have the update button and then the delete button, then as well as style these icons and put a little bit of spacing in between them. So let's simply go ahead to our VS Code, right, and go to the user info component, right? So below the username, right, I need to have a div tag, right? So this div tag is going to house our buttons. So let me just go ahead and style this, right? And I'm going to call the style buttons. So I need to define the button style. So let me simply go ahead and declare the object, right, which is going to house our style for buttons. So with this one, I'm simply going to say display, right, display flex, because I simply need my buttons to be side by side. So once I have my buttons here, the next thing that I probably need to do is to put my material UI buttons. So for my material buttons, I'm going to use a component called icon button. So the icon button, we need to bring it in from material core library. So I'm simply going to bring it the icon, right, the icon button, right, from material core, then it's called the icon button. So this icon button is the one that is going to wrap my icons, right? So then for the icons, I need to bring in the create, right, the create icon from, then this one I'm going to bring it in from the icons library. Then this one I'm going to it's called create, yes, like this. Then the next one that I need to bring it in is the delete, right, is the delete icon, right? So this one I'm going to bring it from the icons library and it's called delete, right? So once I've brought in these three components, right, you have to make sure that for the icons themselves, like the delete and the create icon, they're going to be wrapped with the icon button. So let's simply go ahead and do that. So inside my div tag here, I'll bring in my icon button component, right? So inside this icon button, this is where I'm going to put my icons. So in this case, I will firstly put the create icon button, the create icon, right, like so. Then next I need to put the delete icon, right? So let me quickly go ahead and say delete, copy and paste this and delete icon. So once I've brought in my two icons, the next thing that I probably need to do is to go ahead and style my icon button. So here I just need to style it, and I'm going to do some inline styling so that I can actually go ahead and change the color of my icon. So I don't want it to be black because by default it will be black, but I want to give it a grayish color. So I'm simply going to say hashtag 888, let's say 990. So this will give it a grayish color, right? So once I've done that, the next thing that I need to do for this is to color the delete icon. So for the delete icon, I'm simply going to use the color prop that comes with the icon button. So the color prop that I'm going to use in this for its value, I'm simply going to say secondary. So the secondary, it will give it a reddish color, right, for the delete button, which is the warning button. Right, so once I've done this, I now have my two buttons and my and I also have my styles for my buttons. The next thing that I need to do is I need to put my event. So for this tutorial, I'm going to have the delete part of the application, then the update. You guys, I think you would have to do it for yourself. So for the delete one, so let's simply go ahead and say on click, right? So I'm simply going to say on click. I'm going to have an on click event. So what I'm going to do is, like, for example, we want to delete a specific user, right? So in this case, let me simply go ahead and have my callback with an event, right? And let me simply go ahead and call, let's say delete, right? Delete user. So this is the function that I'm going to call, and this function is going to take an ID, because it's going to take an ID because we need to know specifically which user we are deleting. So we need to specifically distinguish them by the ID. So this delete user function, I need to define it in this component. So let me simply go ahead and do it here. So I'll simply go ahead and say delete, right? Declare my function, right? Delete user, and it's going to be an arrow function that is going to take an ID, right, like so, and I'll do it like this, right? So what I need to do is, for when the user click delete user, what I need to do is I need remember we said for all the API actions that we're going to do to REST API, we are going to do them in this app.js. So which means somehow we need to actually go ahead and fire it so that it will be triggered in this app.js. So to do that, remember, for our props app, we need to use the prop.functional function. So I'm simply going to say prop props dot so it's prop dot let's say remove user, right, like so. Then remove user, it's simply going to take the ID. So remember we said when we are using props, so what this means is, if you say props dot remove user, when this function runs, when it sees this function, what happens is it will actually go ahead to the parent where this user info component is being housed and fire the remove user prop from there. So in this case, the user info is being called from the users component, right? So which means we need to catch the remove user prop here. So let's simply go ahead and catch it. So we say remove, right? So remove user, then we simply go ahead and catch it here. So for the remove user, remember, I don't want the remove user to be actioned in this users component. I want it to be actioned in the app.js. So we simply go ahead and say props again. We simply go ahead and say props dot remove user, so that this remove user will actually be triggered where this user component is. So this user component is being fired from the users component, so which means we need to accept it. So remember, we said if you can use destructuring, so which means there's no need to say props.remove user. You can actually go ahead and catch it here in your props and say remove user, like so, So once you've done this, then this where this remove user, since it's a prop, is going to be actioned where this user is being called from. So this user is being called from the app.js. So this is probably where we need to catch the remove, finally catch it here, the remove user. Then we simply go ahead and define our function remove user like so. So in this function, this is where we need to catch it, right? And simply go ahead and define it here. So simply go ahead and say const. Let's simply go ahead and say const remove. What's going on? Remove user like so. So remove user, remember it takes an ID. So this is where we finally want to handle our remove user for our API call. So let me simply go ahead and console log this. So I will say console log, then I'll simply say remove user code from app.js, right? So my remove user, I'm simply calling it from my app.js. So which means whenever we fire this remove user from the user info, it will be reference to, so our prop drilling, we're drilling upwards, our state upwards. So it will from info.js, then to users.js, then finally to the app.js where we want to do it. So once you have done this, I think we can simply go ahead and save this users component, and we've brought it in here. Then here as well, since we are saying props.remove user, we don't need to say props. Since we are using our ES6 destructuring, we simply need to go ahead and catch it here. So we can simply go ahead and say remove user like so, right? So since we are catching it here, we are passing it here, which is fine, right? And then it's being triggered from here. So once we have done that, the last thing that we probably need to do is, so here, let me simply go ahead and pass the ID so that we can actually see the ID being displayed. So we use the backticks, the ES6 backticks. Then I'll simply go ahead and define my variable. So this is the ID, right? So this is the ID. So in my string, I'm simply going to display the console remove user with the ID. All right. So the next thing that we probably need to do is to define our props data types. So in this case, we can actually see that in this user info component, we probably have the two props, right? So we need to define the our prop types. So let's simply go ahead and do that. So import, right, prop types from prop. So this is a good practice because your app, it will bring about the robustness in terms of your application. So let's simply go ahead and do that and define the data types for our props. So this component is called user. It's a functional component called user info, right? So we are simply going to say user info dot prop. Remember our camel casing, so it's prop types, right? Like so, is equals to, and let's define our object. So for our prop types, remember we said we have the user, which is an object, and then the remove user, which is a function. So let's simply go ahead and do that. So we have a user, right, which is going to say prop types dot, this one is an object, right? So it's not required because at times we might not have data in our get request. Then the next thing that we need is the remove user. So this one is prop type is actually a function. So say prop types dot function, right, a function, and this one is probably required. So let's say this one is required. So once you have done that, let's simply go ahead and go back to the users component, right, and define our props. So in this users component, let's simply go ahead and bring in import prop types from, right, prop types like so, right? Then let's simply go ahead and define our props. So we say users dot prop types is equal to, then let's declare our object. So this one for its prop types is expecting a user's props, which is going to be since we're mapping, it's going to be an array of users. So let's simply go ahead and say array of users. Then the other one is remove user, which is coming from the user info component. So remove user and its prop type, this one is a function, right? So this one is going to be a function like this, and this one is totally required. So once you've done that, once we have defined our prop types and its data types, we now have some sort of robustness in our application. So the next thing that we probably need to do is to actually go ahead and test this out. So let's simply go ahead and move to our Chrome and refresh our page, right? So once you've refreshed your page, you can actually see that we now have our two buttons, right? So we have our two buttons. So here I think I haven't styled this, right? I think I need to style this and put some padding here on this icon. So let's quickly do that. So let's go ahead and go back to our user info, right? So let's go back to our user info. Then on our icon button, sorry, is the account circle icon, right? We need to put some padding and some style. So let's simply go ahead and say style, right? So in this one, I'm going to have my inline style. So for my inline style, I want it to have a greenish color. So for the greenish color, I'm simply going to say 138 then A04, right? So this is some greenish color. Then for some margin, then I'll simply put some margin, which is going to be let's say 0 pixels, top, bottom. Then left, right, I can simply say, let's say 10 pixels, and the rest I'll leave it at 0, 0, like so. So let's save this up. So once we have saved this, let's quickly go ahead and navigate to our Chrome and refresh our browser. Right, okay, so as you can see, we now have some nice margins here, and our text is now looking fine. So let's simply go ahead and inspect just to make sure that we do not have any errors or any complaints from our console. All right, so okay, so as you can see, it's saying each child in the list should, okay. Oh, all right. So what happens here is whenever you are mapping through a list of elements, whenever you are displaying a list of elements in React, these elements should have a unique key. So how you go about defining the key, let's go ahead and go back to our VS Code and go to the users component, right? So this is where we are mapping our list of users, and in this component, this element called user info is supposed to have a key with the unique values. So in this case, you simply go ahead to your component, be it a div tag or any other thing, but in this case, it's a user info component. So you simply go ahead and define something called key, then simply go ahead and unique, so that your components will be uniquely identified by React. So in this case, what's unique about this component is probably the ID that comes from the user object. So let's simply go ahead and put the ID, so user.id as our unique key, and save this up. And let's simply go back to our Chrome, right? And let's refresh our browser. So as you can see, we no longer have the complaints key. So that was it, guys. I know that it has been a little bit long, but just hang up a bit. So what we are now left with is we have now designed our UI for the most part. So what we now need to do is we now need to look at the CRUD functionality of our front-end application, right? So in this case, we now want to use some more features that comes with React hooks, right? With the use effect hook, right? So in this case, what we now want to do is now want to go ahead and implement our API calls. Like for example, for the delete button, we want it to actually go ahead and delete data from our API. Then as well as for our get data, in this case, it's getting this data from, right now we have hard coded this data, but we want it to be able to have a get request from our API that we created using Spring Boot, right? So if you haven't checked out how you create the API, just go ahead and check out the videos of creating a REST API using Spring Boot. Then finally, we want to look at how we can actually go ahead and post your data by this post the data to a REST API in the Spring Boot REST API. So guys, just stay tuned and see you in the next one.